It was a quiet afternoon in Birmingham, Alabama, the kind of day where the world moved just slow enough for people to forget they were part of something bigger. A city bus pulled up to its usual stop, doors hissing open with the same tired breath they released every hour. Most passengers didn't bother to look up from their phones. Just another stop. Just another rider. But then Mr. Jeremiah Cole stepped on board, 75 years old, African American, wearing a worn military jacket, a dark knit cap, and leaning on a carved wooden cane that had clearly seen more than its share of years. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply nodded at the driver, paid an exact change, and began his slow walk down the aisle. His steps were steady, deliberate, balanced not by age but by discipline. Some glanced his way and quickly looked away. Others didn't notice him at all. He passed a row of empty seats, then sat near the front window, his back straight, his cane resting across his lap like a quiet sentinel. To most, he was just an old man. But if anyone had looked closely, they'd have seen it. The calm tension in his jaw, the trained alertness in his eyes, the way he sat. Not like a man resting, but like a soldier standing guard. What no one on that bus knew was that this ordinary ride would soon become unforgettable. Not because of violence, not because of shouting, but because the man they overlooked was about to show them what quiet strength truly looked like. And the moment he would rise, not just to his feet, but to his full story, was coming faster than anyone expected. If you're ready to see what happens next, comment the number 7 below. This isn't just a story about a bus ride. It's about what happens when a man's silence speaks louder than the noise around him. Just 2 stops later, the mood shifted. The bus came to a screeching halt near Edgewood High, and in burst the noise. 4 teenage boys clambered aboard like they owned the place. Loud, careless, cocky. The Edgewood crew, as they called themselves. You couldn't miss them, and they didn't want you to. Jalen, the self-declared leader, wore a hoodie half-zipped over a designer t-shirt, gold chains swinging with every exaggerated step. Right behind him came Trey, the loudest chewing gum with his mouth wide open, beatboxing obnoxiously. Then there was Malik, filming everything with his phone, ready to post whatever chaos they caused. And finally Devin, the quietest, but the one who laughed the hardest when things went too far. They didn't look for seats right away. They prowled. Scanning the bus, they locked eyes on anyone who flinched, anyone who looked uncomfortable. For them, it wasn't about getting somewhere. It was about being seen. "Yo, what's up, Birmingham?" Trey shouted, throwing his arms open like a rapper entering a concert. A few passengers rolled their eyes. Others sank deeper into their jackets. They'd seen this before. And then Jalen saw him, Mr. Jeremiah Cole, sitting still, not reacting, staring out the window like the world didn't exist behind him. "That's your grandpa, Trey?" Jalen smirked. "Looks like he's about to fall apart with that stick." The others laughed, loud, purposefully. The kind of laugh designed not to be funny, but to test boundaries. Jeremiah didn't move, didn't blink. His cane rested across his knees, both hands gently folded over it. To the Edgewood crew, this was an invitation, a new target. They didn't know yet who they were talking to, but they were about to find out. At first, the other passengers tried to ignore them. It wasn't the first time loud teenagers had turned a city bus into their personal stage, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But the Edgewood crew wasn't just loud. They were performers, and today they had found a new audience, or so they thought. Jalen turned to face Mr. Jeremiah Cole directly, his voice rising above the dull hum of the engine. "Yo, old man," he said with a grin, "you get that cane in Nam, or did you steal it from a museum?" The other boys howled with laughter. Malik, ever the documentarian, had his phone out, already filming. Trey leaned in and added, "Bet he used it to fight off dinosaurs or something." Still, Mr. Cole didn't respond. His eyes remained fixed out the window. His fingers, however, tightened ever so slightly around the handle of his cane. Devin, who had been quiet until now, nudged Jalen and muttered, "Maybe we should chill." But Jalen was too far into the spotlight. Backing off wasn't in his nature. Jalen walked down the aisle, slow and deliberate, until he stood just a few feet from Mr. Cole. He leaned down, his voice lower now, mocking, personal. "You deaf, Grandpa? Or are you just too slow to keep up?" No reaction. So Jalen reached out and took the cane. There was a sharp intake of breath from a woman seated nearby. A teenager pulled out his phone. Even the bus driver glanced nervously in the rearview mirror. Jalen held the cane up like a trophy. "What's this made of?" he said, examining it. "Oak? Walnut? Memories." Trey giggled. Malik zoomed in on his camera. And still, Mr. Cole didn't move. But something had shifted, not in him, but around him. The energy on the bus changed, like the air before a thunderstorm. The kind of quiet that didn't calm, it warned. Passengers began to notice. A few put their phones away, suddenly unsure if this was entertainment or escalation. Autumn Harris, seated a few rows away, locked eyes with Mr. Cole and instinctively hit record on her phone. The moment had arrived. The joke had crossed the line, and now the silence was starting to speak. In the fifth row, just out of the Edgewood Cruise line of sight, Autumn Harris sat completely still, her phone angled subtly against her leg. She hadn't said a word since the boy stepped on the bus. She rarely did. As a journalism major in her third year at UAB, she'd learned that sometimes silence told the story better than sound. But right now, silence wasn't just observation, it was preparation. She'd started recording the moment Jalen raised his voice toward the old man. At first, it had seemed like another typical viral moment, loudmouth teens embarrassing themselves for clicks. But then something shifted. The second Jalen snatched the cane, Autumn's instincts kicked in. This wasn't harmless teasing anymore. This was about power, and someone was about to misuse it. Through her camera, she zoomed in on Mr. Cole's face. He hadn't said a word. His posture was calm, unmoving, but his jaw was set, his eyes focused. Not on Jalen, not on the others, but somewhere far deeper. A place that only he could see. The kind of place you return from changed. Autumn recognized it, not the place itself, but the look. She'd seen it once before in her grandfather, a retired Marine, when he sat alone on the porch and stared at the horizon after sundown. That look didn't belong to a fragile old man. It belonged to someone who had endured. Still, Mr. Cole didn't reach for the cane. He didn't rise. He didn't argue. But Autumn knew what was coming wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be dramatic. It was going to be real. And when it happened, whatever it was, she'd have the truth. On video, frame by frame. Behind the camera, she barely breathed, keeping the lens steady as Jalen spun the cane in his hands like a toy. Around her, the other passengers sat frozen, unsure if they were witnessing comedy or something far more dangerous. Autumn kept filming, not to go viral, but because something in her said this was the kind of story no one would believe unless they saw it themselves. The laughter continued, but it was beginning to sound forced. Jalen spun the cane once more in his hand, expecting another round of chuckles from his crew. But even Trey had stopped grinning. Something felt off, though none of them could quite name it. Then came a sound no one expected. A voice. Low, calm, firm. 7 men died within arm's reach of that cane, Mr. Jeremiah Cole said without turning his head. The entire bus froze. Jalen lowered the cane an inch. "What?" Mr. Cole finally looked up. His eyes, weathered and steady, met Jalen's without anger, but with something far heavier, something ancient. "Their blood is in the grain. I carried it with me for miles through the jungle. I used it to hold up a soldier with both legs gone, and I held it over the grave of my best friend in Da Nang." He paused. "And now you're waving it around like a baton in a marching band?" No one laughed, no one blinked. The bus had become a vacuum, silent, tense, held together only by the gravity of those words. Jalen, for the first time, didn't know what to say. He looked at the cane like it had changed in his hands, like it had suddenly gained weight. Even Malik lowered his phone. Mr. Cole stood up slowly, his back straight as a flagpole. "I didn't ask for thanks. I didn't come on this bus looking for respect, but I earned both long before you were even born." The only sound now was the steady hum of the bus engine, and Autumn's phone, still recording every second. No shouting, no fighting. Just truth, delivered like a quiet explosion. If this moment hit you deep, comment the number 7 below to keep watching what happens next. If it didn't move you, comment 0, but stay tuned anyway, because some truths don't shout, they whisper, and still leave a mark you'll never forget. Jalen was still holding the cane like it was a trophy, his smirk slowly fading as the silence around him thickened. Something in the air had shifted, so subtle, yet undeniable. The passengers weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting for what they didn't know, but they felt it. Then Mr. Jeremiah Cole finally spoke. His voice was low even, but it cut through the bus like a thunderclap. 7 men died within reach of that cane. The words were simple, unshaken, but the weight behind them made every head turn. Jalen blinked, stunned. What? Mr. Cole raised his eyes and looked directly at him. No anger, no fear, just truth. I carried that cane through the jungles of Vietnam. I used it to pull a man out of a burning helicopter. I used it as a crutch when my legs gave out after 14 miles of marching with no food. I carved their names into the grain with a penknife when I had nothing else. Now even Trey's laughter had died. Malik lowered his phone. Autumn, still filming, was holding her breath. I don't carry it because I'm weak, Mr. Cole added. I carry it because I remember. The silence was absolute. The hum of the bus engine faded into the background. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Jalen glanced at the cane like he was holding a ghost. His fingers loosened. His posture changed. And though he didn't say a word, the way he slowly handed it back said everything. Mr. Cole accepted it without flinching. No thank you, no speech. Just a subtle nod, and then he sat back down, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. No one on that bus would forget that voice, or that sentence, or the sudden knowledge that they just met someone extraordinary, in the most ordinary place. The bus continued down the street in heavy silence. No one dared speak. Even the Edgewood crew had retreated into their seats, eyes forward, the weight of Mr. Cole's words still pressing against the walls. Autumn glanced at her phone. The video was still recording, but her hands were trembling slightly. She could feel something building, though she didn't know what. Then 2 blocks later, the driver pulled the bus over unexpectedly. Red and blue lights flashed in the side mirror. A patrol car had appeared behind them, sirens off but lights spinning like a silent alarm. Gasps rippled through the passengers. The driver stood up and turned toward the bus. Everyone remained calm. The officers just want to speak with someone. Jalen muttered a curse under his breath. Trey looked ready to bolt. Malik had already stuffed his phone into his pocket, panic setting in. Devin just stared at the floor, frozen. The doors hissed open. 2 officers climbed aboard, one older white male, the other a younger black woman with calm eyes and a firm stance. The male officer scanned the crowd while the female officer stepped forward, eyes fixed on one man. Mr. Jeremiah Cole? She asked. The entire bus held its breath. Mr. Cole looked up, unfazed. Yes? She didn't pull cuffs. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, she stood at attention and offered him a sharp, respectful military salute. My father served under you in Vietnam, sir. Sergeant Thomas Reed. He told me if I ever met you, I was to say thank you for saving his life. A beat of stunned silence passed, then murmurs echoed through the bus. Jalen looked like he'd just swallowed a rock. Malik's jaw dropped. Autumn lowered her phone, too stunned to react. Mr. Cole, quiet as ever, nodded once. Thomas was a good soldier. The male officer added softly. We reviewed the footage from this bus. We're not here for you. We're here to make sure you're okay. Every pair of eyes turned toward the Edgewood crew. Jalen tried to speak, but no words came. Trey looked away. And for once, the camera wasn't on them. It was on the man who hadn't needed to raise his voice to command a room, or a generation. And just like that, the narrative changed. The bus hadn't picked up an old man. It had picked up a legend. As the officers stepped off the bus and the doors hissed shut behind them, a heavy silence remained. But this silence wasn't the same one that followed mockery or disrespect. It was a silence of realization, of reckoning, the kind that forces people to look inward. Jalen sat with his head lowered, the same hands that had gripped the cane now fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. Trey stared blankly out the window, chewing his lip. Malik had put his phone away completely, no longer interested in recording. Even Devin, usually the most indifferent, looked like he had just walked away from a battlefield he never meant to enter. Mr. Cole remained seated, facing forward, cane across his lap again, like it had never left. His face revealed nothing. He wasn't looking for apologies. He wasn't waiting for them to grovel. He had already said what needed to be said, but something in that unshakable stillness made Jalen stand. He walked slowly toward Mr. Cole, not like before, with swagger and jokes, but cautiously, like someone approaching sacred ground. He held the same cane he had once disrespected, now gripped gently in both hands. Jalen paused, then said, voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know." Mr. Cole looked up, his eyes steady, but not cold. Jalen extended the cane with both hands like an offering. Mr. Cole accepted it, gave a quiet nod, and looked back out the window. No drama, no lecture, just a moment shared. The rest of the Edgewood crew followed suit. Trey gave a silent nod. Malik mouthed, "Sorry." Devin didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They returned to their seats, not defeated, but changed. Not humiliated, but humbled. No more jokes. No more noise. Just the quiet turning of four young men who had come on that bus as punks, and were leaving it with the weight of a man's legacy pressing gently on their shoulders. The bus rolled on, its wheels humming softly beneath the weight of a moment no one could quite explain, but no one would forget. No one spoke. Even the usual chatter and the engine noise seemed muted, as if the vehicle itself understood that something sacred had happened inside its walls. Mr. Jeremiah Cole sat exactly as he had before, back straight, eyes forward, hands resting gently atop his cane. Nothing about his posture had changed, and yet everything about the energy around him had. He didn't need a thank you. He didn't need applause. The silence around him was louder than any standing ovation. The kind of silence reserved for memorials, for funerals, for heroes. At the next stop, the bus slowed to a halt. Mr. Cole stood without a word, the same slow, deliberate movements. He nodded once to the driver, who gave him a respectful nod back, this time with recognition in his eyes. He stepped off the bus onto the wet pavement, disappearing into the golden slant of afternoon sunlight, as if he had never been there at all. Nobody followed him. Nobody dared to. Back inside, Autumn Harris looked down at her phone. The recording had ended. She had every second, from the mockery, to the silence, to the salute. But as she watched Mr. Cole walk away, she realized something. No video could truly capture what had happened. This wasn't just a clip. It wasn't content. It was memory. It was history. And above all, it was real. The Edgewood crew remained seated, still quiet, still changed. The other passengers exhaled softly, returning to their routines. But not to normal, because the bus hadn't just dropped off a man. It had released a legend, wrapped in silence, carried on a cane, and gone before anyone could say goodbye. In a world that often confuses volume with value, the story of Mr. Jeremiah Cole reminds us that true strength doesn't need to shout, it simply stands. His quiet presence, his calm resolve, and the way he carried not just a cane, but a lifetime of sacrifice, offered a powerful message to everyone on that bus, and to all of us watching. For many older adults, especially veterans and seniors who have lived through history, this story resonates on a deeply personal level. It's a reminder that your worth doesn't diminish with age. In fact, with every wrinkle, every scar, every memory earned, you become a living archive of wisdom and resilience. Just like Mr. Cole, you may walk slower, speak less, but when you do speak, your words carry the weight of lived experience. Today's society moves fast, too fast, and often the voices of the elderly are overlooked, interrupted, or dismissed. But moments like this show that when you carry yourself with quiet dignity, people stop. They listen, they change. What happened on that bus wasn't just a confrontation, it was a restoration of perspective. A moment where the younger generation was reminded that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, and honor when it stands before you. So if you're someone who's lived long enough to know the difference between pride and purpose, this story is for you. You don't need a spotlight to shine. Sometimes all it takes is a steady gaze, a firm voice, and the courage to carry your history with grace. If this message touched you, press the number 7 in the comments to show your support. And if you believe others need to hear it, share this video with friends or loved ones, because our next story might be yours, and the world still needs to hear it.